America, my name is Osei-Frimpong. I come to you live usually Monday and Thursday. Today is a Friday show. I have reasons for that. But one reason that people watch this show or listen to the podcast is because I try to make really kind of complicated ideas rather simple and even maybe a little bit entertaining. And so that you don't get caught in a network of concepts and end up screwing up your life. No small number of kids, and not just kids, adults, have made little decisions zigged when they should have zagged for lack of knowledge or wisdom that I give to you every Monday and Wednesday, sometimes Friday on this show. So let's talk about modernity. And when, we hear that word modern family, modern men, modern women, what does that mean? And what does that have to do with subjectivity and subjective freedom? All right, so subjective freedom is just the recognition that one should be satisfied in one's particularity. That means their particular family, their particular job, their particular political environment. One is entitled to satisfaction in their particularity. An individual is entitled to satisfaction in their particularity. And that is something that should be realized as a part of self-determination, right? This isn't obvious that that's the case. It's not obvious that people should be both good and satisfied in the ways that they are good. A lot of people are not satisfied in the ways that they're good, and a lot of people are taught not to be ever happy or satisfied in the particular way that they're good. So the idea that you should be both, you should. Part of what makes what you're doing good is that you're satisfied with the particular way that you're doing it. It's actually rather new, right? You remember, in hardcore arranged marriages and all that stuff, people didn't worry about the satisfaction of the individuals involved in their particularity, but rather they were worried about the goodness of the form itself, abstracted from the individual satisfaction. So just the idea that people should be satisfied in their particularity, their particular job, their particular family, their particular political environment. So in general, that is the distinguishing feature between modernity and antiquity. Now, what does that have to do with subjectivity? All right, so let's actually take this all the way back to Aristotle. Aristotle was a Greek philosopher. A lot of the ideas we have low-key kind of come from Aristotle, just like a lot of the English that we use kind of comes from Shakespeare, although we don't know it. Shakespeare, it turns out that he birthed a lot of English colloquialisms, and just the words that have just come into English have come from Shakespeare. A lot of the ideas that have come into what we consider science and what we consider empiricism, what we consider just good thought, came from Aristotle. So even when Aristotle's wrong, you kind of have to look at what he says to figure out how he did it wrong so that we can be less confused in how we use these concepts today. So the subject. The subject for Aristotle was simply the subject of predicates. It did not actually have any content. In Greek, it's hypokamenon. It just means what's underlying. So what something is has to do with its predicates or its form. For example, a triangle is a three-sided figure. A figure tells you what kind of thing it is, its genus. Three-sided differentiates it from two-sided things and four-sided things. So just saying that a triangle is a three-sided figure gives you a genus and a differentia, and those two are predicates that then tell you what the kind of thing you're dealing with, the form of the kind of thing you're dealing with, right? So you didn't actually, I did that just by talking about predicates. I didn't actually have to point or hold an individual triangle to show you that. But you know everything you need to know about triangles by just looking at its predicates and by understanding its form, understanding its predicates, not necessarily its underlying material, right? This is why we don't have to, like I said, look at every triangle to know what a triangle is, because we know its form. And what a thing is, its essence is its form. The fact that it exists in certain creatures, natural things, like in nature, you might stumble upon a rock-shaped triangle or whatever, that's an accident. So the subject was always just like some underlying thing. Since things are not merely their bundle of predicates, but they are essentially their bundle of predicates, all things, insofar as they are individually instantiated, have a subject. But that subject doesn't differentiate one kind of thing from another kind of thing. The subject is indifferent to the kind of thing it is. For example, and in the same way that material is indifferent to its form, I can have a hunk of leather, and if I shape it into the shape of a hand, it becomes a glove. But if I take that same hunk of leather, I can shape it into a foot, and it becomes a boot, right? So the leather itself, the material, is subject to information that then makes it what it is. It's just potentially something when it's just a hunk of leather. Once it's formed, it becomes what it is, because what it is really a matter of its form. And knowing what it is really knowing its form, not so much its material. Because the idea is that the subject does not contribute anything to the determinate being of the thing. Right? Good. So this gets a little bit complicated when later Galileo actually looks at like different kinds of machines that behave differently, but have the same form, right? So there's this idea that if things are what they're formed to be and their material doesn't matter, that you should be able to scale anything up and anything down, and it's still kind of function appropriately. And so Galileo took this and said, like, there are reasons to believe that this isn't the case. It turns out that the subject matters, the matter matters, right? Like what the thing is made out of has properties that then determine how the thing functions. Form is not nearly enough. You can't just, not everything is a system. Not everything is a system insofar as you know its form, you know how it's going to produce. So I'll make a quick NFL reference for the people at home, because they're coming up on Super Bowl Sunday. There are teams that are known for being good system teams. It doesn't really matter who you put in. The system is what makes it what it is. Good system quarterbacks, if you put them in the right, anyone you can put in that system will thrive as long as they're basically whatever. Galileo will say that, like, actually no, the material matters. The systems don't tell you the story, and actually you can't really know what a thing is without actually looking at the material, because the material itself has properties that add and determine what the thing is in ways that are not obvious. You think it's a system, but you never try to scale up. And, entities like, for example, Marvel will get this confused and tell you that, something like Ant-Man and Giant Man makes sense, when really, of all the things that are bad physics in Marvel, Ant-Man and Giant Man are actually dangerously bad, because it presumes that as long as you keep the proportions, you can shrink things indefinitely and they'll still remain what they are, as long as you keep the proportions, that is, you keep their form. That's not how organs work, because organs are made out of material. That material itself has properties that contribute to their functioning, not just the relationship between different organs. It has to be made out of a certain kind of thing, which is why ants, for example, can lift a zillion times their weight, but if you blow them up to the size of elephants, they'll collapse under that same weight. They'll collapse under their own weight, because it's not actually it's not actually, the material that ants are made out of is not actually made to be scaled up in that way and sustain itself. That's not the way things are. So material matters. Galileo was the first one who said, like, actually, you know what? You have to look at the subject and the properties of the subject in order to understand what it is. You can't just look at the form. This is important because the properties of the subjects gets to the individuality of the thing, right? So when we're talking about what things are, their form, it doesn't really matter how they're instantiated, because it's all the same kind of thing. The individuality doesn't matter. It's only what matters is their particular organization or their particular form. When we say that actually the subject matters, the material they're made out of, that means since material isn't generalizable, the actual thing is an individual, and you're saying that thing's individuality matters. So with the recognition that subjectivity matters, not just your predicates, but the subject, the material you're made out of matters, then we get the idea that individuality matters and not just types. So things are what they are as individuals, not just things are what they are as types. And that is a pretty big recognition. So we're kind of creeping into early modernity. Now you get into a little bit later modernity, and it's not only that things are what they are as individuals, but things register themselves. Things register. Because you can be an individual rock and not register yourself as an individual rock. But now when we deal with animals, animals register what they are as individuals, and then we can talk about satisfaction and what they are and what they register themselves being as individuals, as individuals who fulfill their needs in particular kinds of ways. Right? So once you start registering yourself as an individual, fulfilling your needs in particular kinds of ways, and that being a part of what you are, then we can come to the question of like, are you satisfied? Are you satisfied with what you register yourself to be in the particular kind of way you're being what you are? Or would you rather be a different kind of people, a different kind? And that is kind of how subjects become self-registering and in that way self-determining in their particularity. But individual subjects do that, not like people in general, but individual people start registering their particularity as realized in the individual, and then start being wondering if they're satisfied with their particularity as being an individual. Now, there is an anticipation of that. This in Plato's thought in the Republic, because in the Republic he talks about the need for wisdom to order the different parts of the soul. Right, so you have like the part of the soul that knows things, the part of the soul that does things, and then the part of the soul that like is hungry and just kind of does things without reason, does things for immediate gratification, just desires. It desires. Right? So how this happens is that he looks at markets that are unregulated, markets that are regulated that are unregulated, and they implode because the people, eat too much and drink too much, and they lie in their transactions. So he says you need a principle of regulation to keep the market unified. If you want one stable market that's not going to implode, it needs to be unified, right? And so you need people who are going to make sure that the wants that are both produced and satisfied in the market are universal insofar as they can be accommodated within the market and do not undermine the market. So you need he calls them the guardians or a police force. But that guardian or police force itself might needs to have its particular desires accommodated for by the market. So it needs to be itself, since it's concerned with the universal and securing the universal, it needs to be accommodated to in its particular ways, because we're dealing with actual people, by things that will feed it and all of that stuff. So we have a class of people who are sustained by the market, who themselves are not participant in the market, but then govern the market to make sure that it works in a unified way. And we know this because even a subset of that class actually is wise enough to see that if you don't have that, the whole thing kind of falls apart. Right? So you have a market order which is doomed to extravagance and implosion, and then a different sort of sensibility that sees if we want the unity, if we want actually the market to sustain itself, we need to think about who does what and what's produced and what's not produced. Right? These are two different kinds of ways of willing. One is willing for its particular immediate desire in the market, and the other is willing for the universal. What are the conditions to sustain the unity of the thing? Right? And they both need to be part of the subject, because this market ends up, or this community that is set up as a market ends up governing itself. So the rulers have to rule in a way that's not abstracted from them, but incorporates them. So this is the subject of the rule, a subsection of the subject of the rule that actually has an eye towards keeping the entire polity organized, deciding and ruling and governing governing the polity. So it governs both the market class and itself as the ruling class, right? And so this is kind of an origin of self-determination, because you have this part of the polity that governs the whole for the sake of the unity of the whole, because left to its own devices, it wouldn't, the appetitive part of the city would, spend all of its money on hookers and blow. All right, well, you talk about this with people, with guys, when you say well, don't let your little head dictate what your big head does, right? So that's the idea, is that you should let this head and not your private parts dictate what you do. But they both have rules of their own, and they both have kind of an order of their own. The natural order, the one of your little head, is not going to lead to justice or stability or meaning. And it's not going to understand what it does. It's just going to seek gratification. But you need something else that will order your other appetites, right? So you just have to kind of understand that that's an origin of what it is for the subject to govern itself. A part of a thing governs what it is to be the whole thing. It's just that what part of the thing governs what it is to be the whole thing. Now, how this, and part of the thing has to be satisfied with the particular way that the whole thing is meeting its needs. The thing is, we're talking about two different parts. The little head and the big head, right? We're talking about the part that actually is concerned with the whole, and then we're talking about the part that's concerned with desire satisfaction, immediate desire satisfaction. So when we talk about, and this is what I'm going to just bring it home to subjective freedom at the end, when we talk about subjective freedom and recognize, and people being satisfied in their particularity, you have to understand, should people be satisfied in their particularity as it's willed to procure an object immediately, or should they be satisfied in their particularity as it's a reasoned part of a whole, right? And so, I'm writing a rather long piece on this concerning, this is how we got, the culture of irresponsible divorces, because people took the idea of subjective freedom and they took it to mean that the part of themselves that wants immediate satisfaction has a right to be satisfied, as opposed to the part of themselves that actually thinks about the whole and the meaning of what's going on needs to be satisfied. And these are two different parts with two different orders. One is set for implosion, which, if you are familiar with the culture of kind of casual marriage and divorce and children, it's a lot of desire satisfaction that is set for implosion. And then the other is actually a recipe for meaningful both relationships and purposeful actions that represent, justice for everyone involved, right? So when you think that your particular satisfaction should be satisfied, do you mean all kinds of satisfaction or all kinds of particular satisfaction? Or do you mean the kinds of satisfaction that can be independently justified by reason? If you think you have a right to all kinds of your satisfactions, even your immediate satisfactions being, your immediate particular satisfactions being accommodated, then you are a recipe and probably a pox on all of your relationships. But if you have a right to a particular kind of satisfaction, as that satisfaction's been kind of processed through reason and conceptually determined, then that makes sense. It's still you as an individual, realizing and understanding why what you're doing is good. It's just not, it's you're willing the universal. You're willing the unity of the relationship. You're not just accommodating your immediate will, which is going to set you up for implosion. Now, implosion could look like, divorcing your baby daddy, and then 15 years later looking at your kid and thinking, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't have done that. That's a form of implosion. But that's because you wanted a particular way of life without actually thinking that through. or at least without watching this first. All right. Thank you for your time. And I will see you on Monday talking about something completely different. Just to recap real quick, Aristotle, the subject is indifferent, and that means what a thing is not individual. It's just a particular kind of thing dictated by its predicate. For Galileo, he introduces the idea that actually material matters, and so the subject does contribute something to what the thing is, and you can't just ignore subjectivity or materiality in order to account for the thing. You can't just look at the form. And then you get, like later modernity, Kant, Hegel, a lot of other guys who will tell you that actually when the subject registers itself as a particular kind of thing, living a particular way of life, then it has a right to be satisfied in its particularity. But that satisfaction can't be an immediate kind of satisfaction. That satisfaction has to be still, while subjective freedom, that satisfaction has to be mediated by kind of a concept of the whole. All right. Thank you for your time. I will talk to you on Monday. Peace.